Hi again. In the post that I put up yesterday, I talked a little bit about the unconscious mind, what unconscious processing is all about. And it's something, that I just covered in a very cursory way because, I could talk about it for months since I've been doing this for 45 years. And that would be painful for everyone. So we don't need to have deep discussions about that. But I want to put it in a framework that's very popular today. People are always talking about mindset. There are mindset coaches out there, mindset counselors and therapists, and it's an interesting concept, and I'm with it. I like the idea of mindsets and people changing their mindsets, their state of mind around certain issues. And the unfortunate part of it is some people think this has to be some grand major thing in your life. You have to change your mindset, change your whole paradigm, your way of thinking about the world before you can solve X, Y, or Z problem or improve yourself or change in some way. And it just doesn't have to be that way. People don't have to make things that complicated. A lot of times they just aren't. Now, I will say, even based on some of what we talked about yesterday, you do change your state of mind every time you make a change in some way. But most of those ways are subtle. It can be very, very small. And it doesn't have to be a major experience. I remember years ago, John Grinder, one of the people who developed NLP, was talking to us about making change with people. And he made it an important point. He said, you want to make the smallest change you can make that won't upset the whole system. Whatever's going on with somebody, you don't want to have them have to make a major life change every time they do something. So you want the smallest change possible, even if you're doing corporate consulting or coaching, but big enough to make the change that you're trying to get. So I always took that to heart. I thought that was brilliant advice, and I always try to do that as well. So I like to make things as simple as possible when it is possible. So I want to give you an example of this. There's an exercise that I do generally to illustrate something about how we understand language, how we make meaning of things. My friend David Gordon, one of the great NLP trainers, will tell you human beings are meaning making machines. Everything we do has some meaning behind it. And the meanings are bigger than just a dictionary definition. So in this exercise, I give people words to think about. And in that, pay attention to what's going on inside. You can do it yourself now. So if I say the word chair, probably a picture of a chair comes up in your mind, or maybe you're sitting in one and you feel it, or you see one in front of you. I have another one over there. My eyes are drawn toward that. Those are natural responses. Those are the internal responses that are the meaning for that word. That's how we work inside. So when I hear chair, there's a meaning inside me. I don't have to go to the dictionary to look it up, and I don't have to remember a dictionary definition to make sense out of the word. I have experience of what chair means. But the next part of the exercise is to make the words a little more difficult. So if I say information or communication or relationship, something like this, it becomes a little more amorphous. It's not all that easy to make a picture of necessarily, but we have those pictures, and all of ours are unique to us. We have our own meanings for these things based on our personal experiences. So everybody has their own dictionary in their head, basically, their own understanding of how things work. So one of the words that I always use when I'm doing this with groups of people is education. And the reason I do it is, and maybe this is something that happens for you when you hear the word, in a big group, you'll see people going through all the things that they do, remembering things. People are making pictures or talking to themselves and having whatever feelings they have. But usually there's a few people in the group where you look at their face and it looks like this, right? So I was doing one of my sessions. I do coaching sessions for coaches, basically, and counselors. So there's sort of a mix of training and mutual sharing and case studies and things like that. And they're a lot of fun and really helpful and useful for me as well as them. And I remember about 4 years ago, it was in 2021. I did this with my group, and one of the students went, ugh. as soon as I said the word education. And I went to her and said, okay, what came up? So for most people with that word, some idea of school comes up. Not for everybody, but for most people, they remember school in some way or form. Some people remember a specific school. Some people just have a picture in their mind of a building that they went to. Some people might remember a particular teacher. It's different for different people, and there's no right or wrong to it. But for some people, as soon as they think of school or education at all, this deep, heavy, unpleasant feeling comes up, and that's what was happening for her. And it was clear and obvious right away. And so, we asked her a couple of questions about this, and she said, "Oh, it's been terrible. I've hated school forever. It's something that for me has become part of my life. I avoid learning experiences. I avoid going to any kinds of classes and stuff." Uh, and she said she came to the one that we were doing because it was fun and different and out of the ordinary. And by the way, anybody who does training with adults knows this happens. You see people who walk into your class and they come in like with their arms folded or giving you bad looks and stuff. And it's just has nothing to do with you. It has nothing to do with the class that you're teaching. It's just their response to classes in general. And it comes from, somewhere in their past that was unpleasant. So something that we all have to deal with, anybody who does training or education of any kind. So we talked about this for a couple of minutes, and I didn't want to dwell on it because it was unpleasant for her. Now, most counselors, coaches, people helpers of any kind, maybe even a friend or a relative would say, well, let's explore that. Let's go back to those times and look at the bad things that happened to you in school or whatever they might be. And sometimes I'll do that. It's a perfectly appropriate way to help somebody. But it isn't the only way, and it's not always necessary. So in this case, I chose not to. I didn't want her to feel bad, and I wanted to demonstrate that very simply we could probably do something with this. So instead of delving into the past, I said, well, in the past unpleasant experiences, I said, well, let's look at the past in a different way. Can you remember a really fun learning experience that you had back then? And it took her, a minute or so, and she kind of came up with one. And I said, well, look at it some more, kind of get into that. And then the joy came back of that experience. And I had to remember a couple of more. So we had 3 good examples from the past. These are called counter examples, by the way. You look for examples of something that's the opposite of the thing that you're trying to reverse. So we went through this, explored it a little bit, found a couple of interesting patterns, and using a couple of simple techniques for memory helped her go find these memories because she had trouble at first, and then kind of connect them together and to see what those patterns were. So instead of exploring the past unpleasant patterns, we explored the past pleasant ones and simply connected them together in a couple of ways. And found a pattern there that had to do with how she enjoyed learning, how she would do it herself if she was. And she actually kind of came up with a plan. So we connected all this together and then again used the word education and got a big smile and a warm feeling, obviously. And I said, what's it like now? She said, this is really, really different. And it was a big change for her. And in fact, when we talked to her about it a couple of weeks later in one of the follow-up classes, she said this was one of the biggest life-changing experiences she'd ever had because it completely changed her orientation towards learning. And she'd actually started to pick up some of the things that she'd wanted to learn before but had put off because the whole idea of learning was so unpleasant for her. And so she actually started a program where she was going to find the things that she'd always wanted to learn and put them together and was excited about it. It was going to be fun for her. So this is, if you do any kind of coaching or counseling, you try to say, well, what's the technique here? And I could probably name 2 or 3 techniques that this would match. Some people who do hypnosis might call this subjective reversal. from a guy named Dave Dobson, who was an old friend, who may have invented it. I'm not sure that he did, but he's certainly the one who popularized it and taught it to people. People in NLP would call this, well, you made a generalization, or you changed her history in some way. All of these things are applicable. They come under the guise sometimes of generative change. Some of my friends, Robert Dilts and Steve Gilligan, would talk about things like that. All useful, not important. What's important is to know how people work. You don't have to have a technique. You don't have to reach into a box and pull something out. You just have to know how people operate. And that for me is the most important thing. That's what helped in this case more than anything. How does this person work? How is she creating this unpleasant response? What else creates pleasant responses for her? How can we get these things to reverse and stick so that she goes into the future with what she wants instead of what she used to have? And by the way, I always video all of these. I always video my live classes, and of course this was on Zoom, so I record everything. And I was curious, so I went back and looked at it just to see how long the intervention took, and it was 8.5 minutes. So I hope that some of this was helpful today, just this little discussion about how we understand things and how we learn and can make changes in very simple ways in just a few minutes. And maybe this was useful for you to think about for yourself as well. And I sure hope so. And if you do any kind of counseling or coaching, I hope you can take some of these ideas forward and use them to help people. And as always, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching.